and welcome. My name is Rashad Robinson, and I am the president of Color of Change. I want to first start off by thanking my colleagues at Color of Change, the team at One World Publishing, and the folks here at the Green Space for having us here. I have the immense honor of presenting the second installment of Color of Change's Black History Now series. This one is a kickoff to the 1619 Project's read-along project entitled Democracy, Freedom, Joy, Resistance: How Our History Made Our World. Whether you're joining us in person or via live stream, we're very excited to be addressing the ongoing topic of the preservation of Black history in classrooms across the country. Today, I'm ecstatic to introduce our next guest. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter covering racial justice for the New York Times Magazine, the creator of the landmark 1619 Project, and in 2017, she received the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, also known as the Genius Grant, for her work in educational inequality. She's also won a Peabody Award, 2 George Polk Awards, 3 National Magazine Awards, and the 2018 John Chancellor Award for Excellence in Journalism at Columbia University. Give an applause and a welcome to Nikole Hannah-Jones. I'd like to start off with a question, and I like to ask folks like Nikole Hannah-Jones or Kim Crenshaw or other folks, what is a story from Black history that maybe a story that is not so well known to others, something that both kind of piqued your interest, something that you want more people to know, maybe a person or a story, something that you feel doesn't get as much spotlight? There was so much in the 1619 Project that you talked about, from sort of first discovering certain stories that weren't told to you, to narratives that you uplifted that were incredible contributions. But maybe share something with the audience about something that is not so visible.
That's in some ways, well, hello everyone, first of all. That's such a difficult question to answer because I have a million ideas in my head and which one. But I think the story I would tell that a lot of people were surprised, because all of my work, most of my work prior to the 1619 Project was about education, and yet there's not an essay on education in the 1619 Project. And I think one of the stories that hasn't been told is really how hard Black people fought for education, even during slavery. That I was telling you backstage that the first book that I sold, which I haven't published yet because Rashad was talking about how he's late on his book. And I was saying it's very normal to be late on a book, I've learned, was really about this centuries-long quest for Black Americans to get a quality education. And we know Black people were the only people in the history of America for whom it was ever illegal to learn to read and write. Yeah. We were legally prohibited from having literacy. Books were considered contraband. And yet, all throughout slavery, you have these stories of Black people who would sneak out into the woods and the forest on Sundays, their one day off, and hold schools. They would dig pits where they could go down and not be seen. Of Black people smuggling. Back in the 1800s, Webster, who wrote the dictionary, had what was called a Blue Book Primer. And the Blue Book Primer was a way that you could teach yourself to read even if you didn't have formal education. And so Black folks would put together, do something to get 10 cents or 15 cents so they could buy this Blue Book Primer, teach themselves to read, hiding it under their hats or under their pieces of clothes, and then passing it on to other people to learn to read. And there was just this constant effort to gain literacy, to gain knowledge. And after slavery, you had many white missionary groups and including also the Freedmen's Bureau, who thought they were going to come down south and teach Black people the value of education and start schools. And when they came down south, they found that Black people had already started their own schools, that they were already beginning to educate themselves, that you would find even the 80-year-old who's coming from the field and saying, I want to learn to read my Bible, and sitting next to the 5-year-old in these schools that Black people were building. And so the first institutions that Black people built out of slavery are churches and schools. And these are people with no money, no resources, and the little money they have, they're building churches and schools. And the public school in the South is largely created by Black people. Public education did not exist in the South during slavery. Even poor white children didn't have access to public schools. But Black people who have been liberated from slavery, the first things they push for are public schools to serve all children. So that's a story I wish was told more. Especially considering one of the most nefarious stereotypes of Black people is that somehow we're the only people in the history of the world who don't value education, who don't value learning, and it simply defies everything we know historically.
Yeah, no, exactly. I remember you writing about that in the 1619 Project and sort of that post-Reconstruction work when so many Black folks moved into political positions of power and advanced policies that were universal.
That's right.
Right? It wasn't just about specifically helping Black folks, but about, and even to this day, Black people are more likely to vote for policies that provide universal uplift beyond
a common good over individual good.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And so, I thought that was so incredibly powerful. Going back to like the construction of this project, right, at the New York Times, as you were heading up to the anniversary and you were really trying to think through how to leverage this platform. Take us into that sort of journey a bit, and particularly sort of where we are now and believing that we needed to sort of create this space.
Yeah, so it's almost 4 years ago now that I first conceived of the 1619 Project, which is absolutely wild to me, to just consider everything that's happened since then. And I think the most surprising thing is that 4 years later, people are still talking about the 1619 Project and still wanting to read and explore the project. In some ways, I say thanks, Republicans.
With every new book sold, right?
Exactly. I talk about in the preface of the book how I had been obsessed with the year 1619 since I was 15 years old, which is, about 5 years ago. And so more than half my life. And I was obsessed with the year 1619 when I learned about it in a African American Studies elective course, because even today our history is elective, it's optional. But that date stood in symbolically as a lineage that I didn't know African people, that our people had been here that long, that we arrived before the Mayflower. And that was very important to me because, of course, Black people have a very complicated relationship with our citizenship here, and not even being citizens of this country until the 14th Amendment. So realizing that we had been here before almost everyone else who got the credit for building this country meant a lot to me as a 15-year-old girl. But it also stood in as it helped me understand the power of erasure that people had chosen. Like 1619 happened, but people had chosen not to teach us about that date. They chose to teach us about 1620 and the Mayflower. And I think the White Lion had much more impact on the country that would develop. And so even as a 15-year-old, I was understanding through the date 1619 that what we were taught was not all that could be taught. And that in fact, what we were taught was being shaped by what people wanted us to know and understand. So, fast forward to the fall of 2018, and I'm obsessing again about 1619, and I'm obsessing about the fact that this 400th anniversary of American slavery is approaching, what I consider to be, one of the most foundational moments in the history of our country, and yet most Americans still didn't know 1619. That story was still kind of erased from the national memory, and I'm not at that point. I'm not a teenage girl in Waterloo, Iowa. I'm a grown woman, a journalist of 20 years at one of the largest platforms in the world. And it was really important for me to try to use that moment to bring the year 1619, but also the story of slavery as foundational, not just to the America that was, but the America that is, to force that reckoning, right, that knowledge into kind of the public lexicon. And that's what the project tried to do. It's so interesting to be someone who has spent so much time studying the history of this country, and particularly the prohibitions on Black literacy, the prohibition on Black reading, the fact that there was a gag order in Congress where you couldn't even bring up slavery or abolition in Congress for a period of time, and then to see what's happening in our country right now.
Yep.
And understanding that the way that power holds its power is by shaping our understanding of our world and not allowing us to get access to the information that leads us to question power, that leads us to question hierarchies. And so that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing those same echoes that if my learning this history as a teenager would put me on this trajectory, right? It would empower me. It would lead me to question things.
Amen.
And then to cause others to question things. Then that's seen as dangerous. And so the same instinct that led powerful people to prohibit Black people from being able to read is the same instinct that is leading powerful people to try to stop our children from learning histories that would lead them to question the unequal society that we have as well.
It does in so many ways speak to the power of this project. And there's a video that we're gonna play that really sort of helps to encapsulate this journey of where we've been and where the project's heading. Let's take a look.
What if I told you that the year 1619 is as important to the American story as the year 1776?
Please welcome the creator of the New York Times Magazine's 1619 Project,
Nikole Hannah-Jones.
When the New York Times Magazine began publishing the 1619 Project, the response was enthusiastic.
You've never seen anything that's Black in the New York Times.
Nikole Hannah-Jones created the project and won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary for her introductory essay.
I just love the idea that the descendants of those who were enslaved were able 400 years later in the paper of record to produce this documentation. If you believe that our Constitution still matters, then you also have to understand that the legacy of slavery still matters. There's no greater patriotism.
It's told not through the lens of anger, but rather through the lens of collecting stories.
I feel it's a little angry.
A little angry?
It is my job not to let white Americans sit comfortably in the society they've created and not have to acknowledge the choices that are made.
The 1619 Project and the crusade against American history is toxic.
I've been writing about racial inequality for 20 years, but I've never had my work degraded by the President of the United States.
Conservative lawmakers are asking the Biden administration to abandon curriculum they say fabricates American history in schools.
I've never had lawmakers trying to prohibit my work from being taught. To ban a book or the discussion of an idea means that you do not believe that you can make a better argument. What I hope the 1619 Project does is creates a space where we can actually understand the truth about who we are.
That was really great. To ban a book means that you do not have a better argument. I love that in so many ways. Talk about sort of the evolution, the pushback, and how that has sort of informed where we're at and where we're heading.
Yeah, so one, I think anger is a perfectly normal emotion to feel when you're talking about slavery and its legacy. And I really reject the notion that Black people or other marginalized people have to always be civil and pretend that, be the better person.
Yeah.
We have a right to be angry, and I don't think anger is a bad thing. Most of my work is fueled by a sense of rage that we are an extremely wealthy society founded on these majestic ideals, and the fact that we have so much inequality, the fact that we choose not to live up to them, like these are choices. Yeah. We could have a different society if we want to. And I think this desire, the second to the last essay in the 1619 Project book is written by another banned author, Ibram X. Kendi, another one world author. And the essay is called Progress. Yeah. And it really talks about this American obsession with progress.
Yeah.
Because progress lets us off the hook, right? This notion that, yes, we did some bad things in the past, but we're not as bad as we used to be, and things are getting better in the future. So this idea that we're always moving forward, that progress is inevitable, which is not based in history. It's not true. So when people always want you to be hopeful or don't show anger or resentment at the circumstances, that's really just a way to alleviate us of the need to act, right? Of the urgency to address those things in our society that we think are wrong. So I really reject that. And anyone who's followed my work knows that none of my work ends on a hopeful note on purpose. Like, why would I take you through this journey of all this inequality and then let you off at the end by making you feel like everything will be okay? It'll only be okay if we make it okay. But we have to realize that these are choices. And if the arc of the universe bends towards justice, which I think is a circle probably and not an arc, it's because we bend it. So when this project came out, the project is meant to be an intervention. It's meant to be provocative. You should feel deeply uncomfortable reading the project. You should feel a sense of being off kilter, that so much of what you thought you understood about your society wasn't true, that our society wasn't built on the things that many of us have commonly been led to believe that they have been, which I then think is very liberating, right? Because the history we've been taught is of a society that never existed. And so it doesn't explain our country, right? Like 1776 does not explain January 6th, but 1619 explains January 6th. And if you want to understand how we have in a democracy, one political party that is openly saying if democracy means multiracial people will govern us, we don't actually believe in democracy. You have to understand the legacy of slavery and how slavery shaped our society to understand that, which I think is empowering. But of course, people who have benefited from that hierarchy, people who use our mythology to legitimize the way that they rule, most of us don't want us to think about our society in a different way. And that is where the backlash has come from, right? Is what we're now calling anti-critical race theory began as backlash against the 1619 Project specifically. So first you saw Tom Cotton and Mitch McConnell, of course, two of the most powerful senators in the United States, both who descend from enslavers, by the way, but I'm sure that's completely irrelevant, who introduced legislation against the 1619 Project that would strip federal funds if any school systems were teaching the 1619 Project. Then you saw states introducing legislation banning the teaching of the 1619 Project. Most of that legislation wasn't successful. So then you see the next wave of that, which are this larger propaganda campaign against what they're calling critical race theory. And it's really trying to do two things. One, these folks are not concerned about what's being taught in the classroom, right? They're really not. What they are concerned is about using parents' fears of their children being taught things that they don't like to stoke a racial divide, right? To use the oldest political wedge issue in America, which is race, to further polarize the electorate. And I think to also delegitimize public schools. I think both of those things are happening hand in hand. And the 1619 Project is what sparked some of this, but also it's racial justice protests of 2020, right? There is few people have probably looked at and thought about why the 1619 Project has provoked the backlash as it has more than me. And I looked at the polling of 2020. When even almost half of conservatives said that race was a major obstacle for Black Americans. And as you know, that is antithetical to the conservative ideology, which is that we are a fundamentally equal country and everyone has the same opportunities. And so where Black people suffer, it is because we are pathological, right? It is our own doing. So if you have this racial justice movement, and 1619 and other texts like 1619 are the lexicon of that struggle, right? People are saying it's not just about Derek Chauvin. It's about a society that tells a white police officer that you can kill a Black man, like literally kill him over the course of 9 minutes, knowing that people are filming you, and not feel that you will face any retribution for that. That a society creates that moment.
Yeah.
And people were making those connections in ways that we haven't seen. And so, as you know, that was going to require a response.
Yeah.
So as Ibram X. Kendi says, we have racial progress, but then we also have racist progress. And we are now in a moment of racist progress in our country. And as we were talking about backstage, what I fear is that we're in redemption 2.0, which is what happened post-Reconstruction, which wasn't even what you asked, but I just go rogue, so sorry.
Yeah, no, I love it. And, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking, you know, it's not just, it is the sort of ways in which people and the polling sort of created people saying they understood that systemic racism was actually a thing.
Yes.
But it was also the fact that at that time, people thought the best we could do in terms of activism was clap outside of windows.
Yes.
And it was only racial justice that got people into the streets, mobilized people to action. And so this idea that that both in terms of what people believed, but also the sort of force multiplication for change was racial justice and multiracial groups of people coming together, making demands. They were people feeling pressure to say things that they had never said. You know, we don't take corporate financial support at Color of Change. And I had all of these corporations calling every day trying to give us money or announcing they had given us money. And I was like, we're giving money to Color of Change. I was like, well, no, you're not. But like, can you please respond to the last action that we have on you about XYZ? And so I thought a lot, right, about the backlash also having to go after our superpower in terms of progress, right? And how bad the left, some on the left, Democrats, white Democrats, can be at recognizing that race can be a superpower, but instead began apologizing for a bunch of things. And so while we want to talk about the right, there were people who could benefit on all the things they say they care about by a more empowered racial justice movement that actually wins you climate change, that wins you gender justice, that wins you a lot of things. But the moment that racial justice becomes under attack, people go into their own corners and disappear.
Yeah, all those corporations aren't offering money now.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean, we noticed how fleeting it was. And this is, you know, the kind of core attack on the 1619 Project is that it's unpatriotic and it wants to destroy America, which anyone who's read the project can't come to that conclusion, because I accidentally wrote the most patriotic thing I've ever written, right? I've never seen myself as a patriotic person, right? Patriotism is very fraught when you're Black in this country.
You talk about the American flag.
Right, but understanding that the most expansive and progressive and communal view of America comes from Black people. It comes from the people on the bottom. When you are people who have been denied freedom, when you are people who understand that as being on the bottom of the racial hierarchy, if anyone above you loses their rights, you automatically lose your rights. Means that we have to be broadly progressive, and that whenever we're fighting for any type of justice, it can never be just fighting for justice for ourselves, that it has to be fighting for all people. And that is supposed to be, central to what the Democratic Party believes. But what we were told then is, okay, you have to stop talking about that race stuff so much. And you actually have to accept into the coalition people who don't believe in your equality, people who might be openly racist. And the first kind of major attacks on the 1619 Project didn't come from the right, but they came from the white left, who felt that any racial analysis of America impugns upon the class struggle, as if you can separate race and class from America in this country, which you cannot, right? And so I think that what has been so frustrating and is always the case is Black Americans again and again and again are called upon to save this democracy, to save this country. And then as soon as we do, everything that we fought for gets dropped. We get dropped from the agenda. People want to distance themselves from us. And then here we are again at election time. And now once again, we're being asked to do the same thing. Except what choice do we have? Are we going to go with the party that's literally trying to take away our rights? Or are we going to go with the party that's really not going to do much for us, but they're not going to try to make life worse for us as well. And I just wish people could see that more expansive view of America, right? People who, when Thomas Jefferson wrote those words of the Declaration, some of the most famous words in the English language, that most of us can recite without having to look at the words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. Of course, he is enslaving more than 200 people when he writes those words. But Black people look at those words and say, we believe in those words. And we will fight our own countrymen and countrywomen to make those words true. What is more patriotic than that, right? What is more patriotic than being literally governed by property law? Black people are governed by property law for the first 250 years of this country, and yet saying the words that you didn't even intend for us, we are going to fight to make them true for all Americans. And if we could have that expansive view of American, we could have all those things, right? Like, we have enough money to ensure there is not poverty. We have the highest child poverty rate in the industrialized world, right? We're the only Western industrialized nation where whether you can get health care or not is dependent upon whether you have a job that offers you health care. We have the stingiest social safety net of all of these countries. We have enough money to take care of all of our poor and all of our citizens. And because we cannot get over race and racism and the belief that if we expand social programs, too many undeserving Black people will get something, all of us live poorer lives. And I think that's the vision of the 1619 Project, is that our legacy of slavery hurts Black people the most, obviously, but it hurts all of us, that all Americans suffer. But you can't build a class-based movement that ignores the way that race particularly hurts Black people no matter their class.
In the book, you talk about some of the young people that came up to you.
Yes.
After reading the book, and the sort of and the curriculum that formed, and the schools that began teaching it. And we have been engaged with people and teachers and those folks in some of the sort of fights around the country, not just against the 1619 Project,
right,
but against a range of literature and a number of books from One World that all ended up sort of a focal point of this strategy. I was thinking about this the other night when I was watching a screener for Till, which I thought did an excellent job of really moving Mamie Till's story from a person who was fighting for the horrific, unjust thing that happened to her and her family and her son, to a structural conversation in her fight, which Black people have had to pick up in so many ways. And I was thinking about how much this is not just Black history, but it's white history.
Of course.
And thinking about how much the conversation constantly gets focused on Black history, the 1619 Project, so many of the books that are under attack. And the project, in so many ways, for us, as we go into some of these fights, whether it's the fight in local communities that it happens politically, whether it's the fight with textbook companies to not exclude or deny certain texts, how much this is not simply about what do we want to exclude about Black history, it's about changing white history.
I would argue that I do argue, right, that this history is just American history.
Yep.
That you can't, we want to segregate the histories, and you cannot. I mean, the reason the project is being attacked is not because we're arguing for Black history.
Yeah.
It's because we're arguing that you can't understand American history if you're not including slavery and Black people throughout the entire thing. Yeah. That we are foundational to the American story, that almost every moment you can think about in American history, Black people are actors and Black people are being acted upon, that our cultural, legal, political, scientific, all of these systems are built around slavery and anti-Blackness at our foundation. That's what people get so angry about. It's not that because we produced a project of Black history. Yeah. It's because we're producing a project that says, you understand more about our country by studying 1619 than 1776. That 1776 does not come about without slavery, right? That so much of our society is built on the protection of slavery, on the economics of slavery, on the politics. That's the danger, is that you can't understand America. So we have this idea of America as being about freedom. But as the historian Edmund Morgan says, in America, slavery and freedom begin at the same time. And in fact, white freedom is defined by black slavery. You can see it in the words of someone like George Washington. When they're making the case of why they need to break off from Britain, what they're saying is he wants to treat us like we treat our black enslaved people. He wants to make slaves of us like we have done of them, and we cannot allow that. And so their understanding, right, we're taught that the heart of the American Revolution is the North. Well, one, all 13 colonies practiced slavery, so let's be clear. But that the heart of the revolution is Boston and the Tea Party. But the heart of the revolution is Virginia. And Virginia shapes our national politics and identity more than any other colony and any other state. And Virginia was a slaveocracy, right? Virginia was a slave society. So the history we've been taught would have us think that the fact that the man who drafted the Declaration of Independence was an enslaver from Virginia is somehow irrelevant, that the man who drafted the Constitution, the father of the Constitution, was an enslaver from Virginia, that the man who wrote the Bill of Rights was an enslaver from Virginia, that the first president was an enslaver from Virginia, that 10 of our first 12 presidents were enslavers, most of them from Virginia, that somehow that's irrelevant. That most of the men who drafted our founding documents, who would go on to found our country, were enslavers from Virginia is somehow irrelevant. The idea of republicanism, of representative governance, comes from Virginians, white Virginians, who don't have to worry that the poor can ever take their power because the poor are all enslaved. And they have no political rights. They will not be electing representative governance. And so they can have a representative governance because most of the people who could challenge their power, the majority, the mob, right, are all enslaved. So now we get to 2022, where we were meant to be a white man's country who would be ruled by white people, where people of color would not have political power or authority, who would never be the ones who would rule everyone else. And now they're saying, actually, we don't believe in this because we weren't set up to be a country ruled by people of color. So I guess what I'm saying is the desire to separate those histories when you just cannot, right? That is the danger of the project, is centering slavery, centering black people and saying, you can't understand America if you don't understand that. And the last thing I'll just say quickly, I get this question all the time, like, why do you think Germany has been able to deal with the Holocaust and Nazism in ways that we haven't, right? Like, you don't go to Germany and you don't see any buildings named after Nazis. There's no statues to Nazis. You wouldn't dare have a wedding at a concentration camp, right? Like, we know these things. But the difference here is you can purge all of Nazi Germany and still have hundreds of years of Germanic history, right? Like, this was a terrible blight, but it wasn't the history of Germany. We can't do that here. If we were to purge slavery and enslavers, we would have no history, right? We wouldn't be able to have monuments to the men who wrote our founding documents. We wouldn't be able to have monuments to our first presidents. We wouldn't be able to have monuments to most of our Supreme Court justices. We wouldn't be, all right, like...
Universities.
We would, right.
And
Think about all of the universities named after enslavers, right? Think about all the streets, all of the buildings. There's a reason our most prominent men in our society were all enslavers. So we aren't able to grapple with this history because if we try to erase that or say we have to banish that part of our history, we literally banish our entire past. And I think that is the thing why people have to attack this project.
That was a word. You know, one of the projects we've been trying to do, particularly going around the country, in places where, not just in places where Black history has been under attack, but places where we've been trying to build local political power and engagement, is taking the fight around Black history to those communities, to not just be in defense, but in be in offense, right? The same people that are trying to attack and ban Black history are the same people that didn't want girls to learn math, they didn't want gay teachers, they didn't want evolution to be taught.
Yes.
And this is part of a larger sort of strategy. And how are we going after the infrastructure, but also how are we injecting joy and engagement with our young people to be able to like have these conversations. And we've been producing children's carnivals in a lot of communities, which has been really exciting, bringing young people and their families together and having spaces where we're celebrating Black history. And so I know we have a video to show a little bit about the children carnival work.
There is an attempt taking place right now to erase Black history from curriculums throughout the entire country. There are some states that have taken active steps to remove Black history and ban textbooks from being used in public schools in those states.
This event is all about celebrating and uplifting Black history, and also about talking to our parents, our community members, and our family members about what's at stake in the fight for critical race theory.
If we forget how far we've came from, we'll stop appreciating everything that we're given, and I feel like we'll become complacent as a people. So I just believe that our history should continue to be taught to our children and our children's children.
We have to be more proactive in making sure that they know where they come from and that they're proud of our Black history.
You gotta know what the world has been through in order to make progressive changes to move everybody towards the future.
We are about celebrating Black joy with intention. It is up to us to make sure that we are teaching our children.
To join us in the fight to keep Black history in the classroom, text SQUAD to 55156 or visit us at colorofchange.org.
I just love that so much, Rashad. I know you know this. I've heard this talking to students all across the country. Those who have initiated this critical race theory propaganda campaign say that teaching this history makes Black children feel like victims. And what I've seen is the exact opposite. That our children are so empowered by learning that resilience, the resistance of their ancestors, the ingenuity of their ancestors, and not being erased as agents in the American story. And I haven't met a single child. In fact, as you talk about it, I mentioned in the book, these high school students, these Black high school students in Chicago who said, after reading this project, I have to work harder now because I know everything my ancestors fought for me to get here, and I cannot let them down. Like, this is the way that our children respond to this. And so it makes you think, right? They don't really want our children to feel that sense of empowerment, and that's why you ban books. Anyone who bans books has a narrow, stingy understanding of the world, and they want to control, they want to build intolerance, right? It's not accidental or incidental that the same states that want to ban the 1619 Project want to ban books about LGBTQ kids. They want to target trans children, right? It's all about targeting the most vulnerable for political gain and building children who don't know enough about their world to have tolerance and love of other people. And I think that's what you're fighting back against, and certainly what I am as well.
Well, I wanna thank you before we go out to questions, because part of the work of building racial justice campaigns, part of the work of trying to build power is to be able to have content, stories, ideas that create a North Star. So much of the work we are trying to do at Color of Change is to drive an analysis into action and to push the type of strategic action that opens up new possibilities. But we need the thinkers and the ideas to be able to continue to contribute to a space of learning and understanding, to make people believe that something new is possible, that a tomorrow is worth fighting for, that it can inject the idea that our fight will actually be meaningful in the face of so many reasons why we can sometimes believe that a fight might not be. And part of what we have to do in terms of activism is make people believe that they can fight for something that they actually can't necessarily touch, that they haven't experienced, but to believe by coming together that something more is possible. And the contribution that you've made by unlocking so many different stories of our contributions, of our engagement, of our resilience, of our joy, of our hope, is so incredibly critical to the type of foundation necessary to build campaigns, to build power, and to hopefully win more justice and freedom. So thank you for that contribution.
Thank you.
As you all are rolling out this new Democracy, Freedom, Joy, and Resistance project, talk a little bit about it. Talk a little bit about what the plan is and what the strategy and what you're trying to make happen.
Oh, yes. Great question. I was supposed to mention this and I forgot. So we just announced today, the One World team, which is the publisher of the 1619 Project, that we're doing a 1619 Project National Read-Along. Part of what I've experienced as I've gone all across the country over the last 3 years is so many people wanted to form book clubs or have discussion groups, right? Because this material is heavy. There's so much that people want to discuss. There's so much that people are like, I never knew this. And also, it was a way for us to push back against all of the efforts to ban and restrict learning and conversation around the project. So the 1619 National Read-Along is, we're reading together. We'll be reading 6 chapters of the book, and there will be different tour stops across the country where we discuss the different chapters. And in order to kind of democratize the process, One World is actually releasing those 6 chapters on PDF for people who can't afford to buy the book or you can't check it out from your public library. So the first 2 chapters that we're reading are available now through the 27th. So you have 2 days to download the PDF if you haven't had them. But what I think is so great about it is it just gives us a collective space to learn and to discuss, and to hopefully through confronting our past, create the vision for a better America that we all would like to build together.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, I think that's so great. And particularly, I think about how much the pandemic prevented probably some of the ways in which people might have come around. And now that while we are still very much in a pandemic, there is much more spaces for people to be able to relate and come together, and what can be created through that. What has been has it been a surprising story of either young people or teachers or folks leveraging this text to do something that you maybe didn't imagine when you were going through the work of pulling it all together?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention it's 1619books.com.
Yes.
Almost everything that's happened since this project has come out has been surprising to me. When I pitched the project, I didn't know if people would read it, if people would care. I just felt this was a project I had to do.
Even after the New York Times?
No, I mean, after that I knew. Initially, right?
Okay.
But then I couldn't have imagined that once the project came out, it would become what it would become, that we would be writing multiple books off of it. We're just wrapping production on the 6-part 1619 documentary series that's going to run on Hulu and ABC, that there would be an entire curriculum. There's a 1619 education curriculum and different educational cohorts across the country where teachers are getting together and teaching 1619 and drafting lesson plans. I think what this project has taught me, and I've literally, one day I'm going to have my assistant download every city I've been in talking about the 1619 Project, because it's been absolutely insane. I just got back from the Netherlands where I talked about the 1619 Project there, because the White Lion was flown under the Dutch flag. And so my hotel was across, the dock from where the White Lion left the port. It's just amazing to see these connections and the way people, not just in the United States, but the colonial powers. And I just did an interview with a journalist in Brazil who it's called Projeto Carreno, which is the Brazilian version of the 1619 Project that was inspired by the 1619 Project, and is named after who's considered the father of Black history in Brazil. So the way that people really across the globe have wanted to grapple with this thing that has shaped our entire world. When you go on vacation in the Caribbean is Black because of slavery.
Yeah.
We remade this entire part of the globe through the transatlantic slave trade, at the height of the transatlantic slave trade, Africans by far outnumbered the number of Europeans who came to the New World. And so this desire to understand how were these societies built? Why is Brazil, in a battle over whether it will retain democracy with its own version of Trump, right? All of this, these consequences that we see really across the globe. It's just been shocking that, a girl from Waterloo, Iowa, who really never expected anyone would ever know my name, could produce in concert with so many other brilliant writers and thinkers, this argument, which is what the project is, right, at its essence. It's an argument for the I don't want to say the humanity of Black people, because we have our humanity, but the recognition of that humanity. And it's an argument for the power of, to me, how empowering it is to confront your history and to understand what shaped your world. And so many people have connected, people who I wouldn't think would have any stake in a story about American slavery. So, yeah.
Yeah. I, through the work that we try to do at Color of Change, whether it's like holding a tech company accountable or a Hollywood entity or government, and thinking about the role that narrative plays. And I think a lot that the role of narrative, not just as an object of change, but as a tool of change. Yes. When you have a story that shapes the sort of mental models and understandings, the way it changes people's behavior, right? We can have an understanding about gravity, and then it forces us to do different things about how we get close to something on the edge. And the ideas and the stories about Black people that shape how close people get to Black people, how close people get to their proximity to Black people and Black communities and Blackness. And as I think about all of the challenges we face as we head towards this election, as we head beyond all the challenges we've come from, what does it mean to try to fight and achieve a multiracial democracy that is very much an idea, a hope, but a place where people who are strangers can share land, share space, share power. Having a deep understanding of where we are and where we come from is so critically important. So I'm not sure if there's some sort of final words as you think about not just rolling out this project, but your next book. I'm not challenging you on that. My editor is at One World, so she's sitting right over here, and she's like, "We have to meet," and so we're. I just think a lot about what this ongoing contribution is, but also the fight now over the narrative, to be able to have the tools necessary to shape the behavior of our society and make something real possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I say all the time, I became a journalist because I understand profoundly that narrative drives policy, that a lot of people, you have a certain segment of the population who doesn't care what the facts are. They're going to believe what they want to believe. They're going to support what they want to support. But I don't think that's most Americans. And I think, I often joke that the 1619 Project is intended to be like taking the red pill in the Matrix, right? That you live in a society, the society functions how it functions, and you just think that's the way that it has to be, that it's natural, that it's innate, and it's not, right? All of this has been constructed. Yep. It's all coded. Everything that we see in our society has been built, and it has been constructed to produce exactly what it produces. And there's something tremendously empowering by realizing that all of this was created. Because if you know it was created, you know it can be deconstructed. You know that we don't have to accept the society the way that it is. And so for people who want a different society, that's tremendously empowering. For people who want to maintain a society that benefits them. And to be clear, there are millions of white people in this country who can't get health care when they're sick. There are millions of white people in this country where if they get sick and they have to miss work, they can't pay their bills. There are millions of homeless people who are white, right? This is not, again, we all live in a society where a very small number of people hold all of the wealth and all of the power. And then they scapegoat people of color to say they're the reason you don't have anything, to stop us from actually looking at the people, right, who are leading most of us to live in circumstances that we don't have to in the wealthiest country, one of the wealthiest countries in the world. There were a few weeks ago, the Financial Times wrote a story about United States and Britain and said that we are poor countries with a handful of wealthy people.
Yeah.
And when I read it, I was like, shit, that is true.
Yeah.
Right? No, it really is, right?
Yeah.
So to me, understanding that if you can help Americans realize that what we see in our society is not inevitable, that it doesn't benefit all of us, that you might have your whiteness, but your house isn't that much better than a lot of black folks, right? And that if collectively we take our power, our collective power, which I know is so much of the work of Color of Change, that we outnumber them if we use our power in the right way, that is the vision of the 1619 Project, is to say, one, black people have been the solution.
Yep.
Right? We've always been treated as a problem. We've never been the problem because we have the most expansive view of humanity of anyone in the United States and the most expansive view of rights, that if we collectively take that power, we can actually build the country that so many of us believe we already have. And that is the importance of narrative, is narrative builds the imagination for what our society can be.
Absolutely. That was beautiful. Thank you, Nikole. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. I just invite you to join us in the fight, to recognize the role that each and every one of us can play in the effort to not only push back against the attacks and push back against the infrastructure creating those attacks, but also build the power to actually win. When we tell stories about the inequality we see in the world as unfortunate rather than unjust, we lead people to believe that charitable solutions to structural problems are enough.
Yes.
And so much of what we actually have to build a society that isn't working for charity, but structural change. And that means that we need the stories that actually highlight the fact that the inequality we see wasn't simply a car accident, but it was manufactured in so many ways. And the 1619 Project does so many things, but one thing it does very squarely and unapologetically is show how where we are at right now was deeply manufactured by a set of choices. And what is the choice that all of us make every single day in terms of our political power, in terms of our access, in terms of who we join with, and in terms of how we fight. That is the road ahead, and that is the invitation. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Nikole, for your brilliance. Thank you to my team at Color of Change. Thank you to our friends at One World. Thank you to the Green Space. And take care, be well, and let's keep fighting.